Hi, I'm Eric Westrich with Aquilius Innovation Hub, and we're here with Professor Matt Edwards, who is a biology professor and is the biology emphasis coordinator at San Diego State University. He will also be speaking at our Clean Tech Symposium coming up. Matt, welcome.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am. I'm the marine biology emphasis coordinator.
Okay.
Yeah.
Marine biology emphasis coordinator.
Yep. Yeah. Okay.
So obviously you've got a picture of kelp behind you.
Yep.
Kelp seems to be something you're passionate about. When did
Absolutely.
you first discover kelp? Did you grow up with kelp or did you one day stumble across it? How did that was the first time you really noticed kelp?
I really noticed kelp for the first time during my undergraduate time at UC Santa Barbara. I was going through college. I was a marine bio major that I knew I was passionate about marine biology. I knew that ever since the movie Jaws came out, and I went to see it with my brother in what was that, 1976 or 1977, and came home, and instead of being afraid of sharks, I was passionate. I wanted to know everything about them. And so I always kind of knew I wanted to do marine biology, hunting through the intertidal tide pools and doing all sorts of things. But when I was at UC Santa Barbara, I was lucky enough to get connected with Dr. Dan Reed. He was a marine biologist there, a research biologist, who is one of the eminent kelp ecologists in the world and ran the long-term ecological research program there. I was out diving with Dan, helping him do kelp reproduction and look at population dynamics. And even though I was a diver and I was, had gone diving in kelp forests before, it was when I started diving with him, and we started looking around. The best way I could describe it is if you've ever, walked in a forest and you've walked around, you looked up at the trees and you just gone, wow, this is cool. Look at these things. You looked up and the birds are flying around the tops of the trees. Sometimes there's mammals up there, squirrels and other things jumping around. And underneath, you've got all the different ferns and understory plants. And then you got the streams running through and all the insects on the ground. If that's something that you've experienced and that's something that, you just go, wow, this is really cool. That's a kelp forest. It's a redwood forest.
And also open up and surprise a seal. I've done that too. Got in there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes
what are you doing here? Right in your mask. So that's
right there. And they'll come up and they'll play with you. They'll tug
look
on
in your mask. Hey, what are you doing here? Okay. So obviously you like kelp. So you said, let's learn everything I can about kelp, include growing, scaling populations. Why do we need more kelp?
Kelps do a ton for us. I mean, that's a great question. It's always comes back to when we're doing research, is there an applied aspect or is there a societal benefit to it other than just the kind of the idea of, nature for itself, if you take the John Muir approach, but if you ask the approach, what benefits do we get from it? We get a ton.
Well, what benefit were you most excited about? I mean, first you saw this kelp and you said, I just love it. I could go for a walk in here every day. But at some point you realize that kelp does more than just be a great place to scuba dive through.
Absolutely.
So what was the first big impact that you noticed or were told about?
That's also a great question. And as so many things, we evolve through our life and we change our viewpoints, not necessarily viewpoints.
Yeah, this is your journey we're going through. So
I started
a lot about kelp at the symposium, so they can go online and see your talk. So I don't want to spend, I'm more interested in your journey.
My journey started with just the biodiversity, just the wonder of the ecosystem and all the animals and all the plants, the subtitle plants with it.
Why was that important to you personally?
I have just an intrinsic appreciation for nature. As I started with talking about forests, I love nature for nature's sake. I love animals. I love plants. I love watching their interactions, trying to understand them, and watching the intricacies and the complexity.
So if I'm hearing you right, you first were impressed by the wonder, and then you began to realize that all these things are connected and they need each other and support each other. So you began to look at, well, what drives that, what doesn't? Did I get that right?
That is correct. I started, asking, what are the things that drive kelps to where they are and where they're not? And they should be in places, but they're not. And why is that? Those kind of patterns of discovery and seeking those things out, to me, has its own interest, its scientific discoveries. It's something that I'm passionate about, figuring something out that we don't know, and figuring something out that is hard to figure out. And that
So
takes a lot of
after you
time.
got enough knowledge to be dangerous, if you know this stuff, at some point, some glaring problem must have hit you on the head. Not that there aren't
Yeah.
tons of problems you can look at every day, but what if we were to hit you on the head with one problem? What was the first big problem you really understood or became passionate about?
Why do we have kelp loss? Why do kelp forests disappear from other areas? What are the driving forces of that? And how do they recover? I started studying the effects of storms on kelp, which is one of the big things that dislodges kelp. It's what brings it and puts it on the beach. And then that took me into El Nino Southern Oscillations. And now my lab does a lot of looking at why we have kelp deforestation. Climate change is a huge factor in kelp deforestation, warming waters, the outbreak of urchin barren grounds because their predators have been lost.
So what was the biggest challenge to you personally in moving ahead with this? I mean, you've got university, you've got mentors, knowledge, methodologies, but given all that in your back pocket, what challenged you most personally in taking the next step?
What challenged me was the challenge itself, I guess I would say. We know that they're gone. We know that we've lost them. We're trying to figure out why. I like the challenge of, it's underwater. So, your time
Was
is
it resources, or was it explaining this to other people and getting them care, or was it
no, I've had a pretty.
what was the big challenge you personally had to overcome to get to the next step?
Well, the big challenge to overcome is convincing people who will help support you to do it, right? Funding is a hard thing. We compete for funding. And everybody out there who's writing these grants, the vast majority of us have great ideas. We want to understand different parts of the world, but funding is limited. So you've got to convince funding agencies, funding different groups that your question is salient and your question is important to do, and that you have a pathway of getting there, of figuring it out.
Okay, so were you good at that translation between Kelp speak and funding speak? Was that easy for you, or is that a
I
challenge?
think so. Yeah, I do think I mean, it's that's the question, it's a hard one to answer because you're evaluating yourself. I've had my successes and my failures in writing grants, but all in all, I've had a pretty well-funded lab. I have 9 graduate students. I've got 6 of those graduate students I'm able to fund salaries and everything on. We go all over the world. We've spent
It sounds
10
like
years
you
in
don't
New
have any
Zealand.
trouble finding people like you who also get excited.
Yeah, so my
At least that's not one
graduate
of the
students.
challenges.
No, getting graduate students is not this challenge. There's a lot of people who are passionate about the marine environment. There's a lot of people who have dove in kelp forests and looked around and said, wow, this is what I want to do. I want to figure out how this system works. I want to figure out how these two things are interacting. I want to know what that species is doing. There's enough of that out there. And the hard part is saying no to people because we can only accept so many.
Okay, so you've done pretty good though. You've got your crew of your team of people that you can communicate with and share your passion. You've been good at translating kelp speak to funding speak, which is a very important skill. So that's going well. So what's your biggest challenge right now?
The biggest challenge right now is figuring out how to fix issues that I didn't create.
What kind of issues are these?
Kelp loss. So we have deforestation happening
So in other words, the big problem is kelp. You want more kelp, and we're getting less kelp.
Right. We want more kelp.
And the biggest challenge for you is figuring out what that is, and then do we know what to do about it?
Well, we hope we do. So these things, when you lose kelp over tens to hundreds of kilometers, tens to hundreds of miles, it's hard to restore that. And so you've got to figure out what the root causes of why the kelps have disappeared. And that can take years to do. I think we've got a good handle on what's happening on the north coast of California, where we ultimately lost, about 90% of the bull kelp. I think we've got a pretty good idea of why we've lost it from, say, large areas of Catalina Island and the Channel Islands. And ultimately, it starts with climate change, in that the warming of seawater sets off a cascade of events.
Okay,
and
so
northern
do you have any clue of anything you can do about it that we could start working on today yet?
We do. In the north coast of California, the problem now is sea urchins have changed their grazing behavior. Their predators were taking out the sea stars that normally prey upon them. The kelps disappeared, and sea urchins have changed their grazing behavior. They no longer sit hiding
Okay,
down
so
under rocks.
we've identified that sea urchins are a culprit. One of the things you've identified. Do you think you're on a pretty good track of handling that problem, or is there something you need to do to get other?
Well, I'm involved in that, with a lot of colleagues up north, and we are trying to figure out how do you even remove sea urchins out of that big of an area. And is that
Right now, it's more of a technical problem that will
yes.
move to be how to get other people involved and
Yeah, and people are passionate. The local communities are passionate about that. The dive communities whose industry is based on that. Local indigenous tribes
just need to
whose
get more
culture
of
is
them on
based
the
on that.
menu, I think. If you get more of them on the menu.
Yeah, you get more people involved. We have to start at scales we could work at, which are the size of, maybe a small parking lot or something. And we show that the pathway of what we do, the intervention can work at that scale. Then we have to work up to larger.
So in our jobs, we all have things we love to do, things that we're okay doing, and things we don't like to do in everything we do. Let's start with if there's one thing you could take off your plate
Mhm.
right now that you wouldn't have to do anymore. It would get done, but somebody else would do it. What would it be?
Wow. Administrative.
Yeah.
I don't want to, I'm not done putting a scuba tank on my back and going underwater. I'm not done with that. I'm not done.
But if there was one thing that you would absolutely hate for somebody to take off your plate.
I would hate that. Yeah, I'm not ready to do that. I've been in my job at San Diego State going on 23 years, about 15 years before that for undergrad and graduate school. So, I'm at about 35 years of doing this, and I'm not done. There's administrative stuff, that we all have to do. You have to do the paperwork. You have, in your classes, you have to do the grading aspect in the, you have to do the report writing, all that. I wouldn't want to, that's what I would take off my plate if I had to do, the administrative stuff. I
Very
still like
good.
doing the work.
So
I still like
more
doing the
diving,
notes.
less administrative. Got it. What are you most excited about right now?
Um,
Ted, and in this passion you have, what is the one thing you're most excited about right now?
Restoring kelp beds that have been lost. Bringing these things back, we've figured out, we know physiologically, we know ecologically why they disappear, and things have changed. And so figuring out how we can bring kelp beds back to these huge areas of Catalina, which is so important, the areas of the North Coast, bringing them back in the face of these ongoing problems. And so that's what I'm most excited about, regenerative or restoration of kelp. And that's bringing in everything I've learned about physiology and ecology and linking those things together, and trying to apply that now to solve issues that are a problem, that need to be solved.
So we've learned that you can translate kelp speak into funding speak. Let's look at the next problem, which is translating that into crowd speak. How is the average person that doesn't know anything about kelp or any of this, let's say you're able to be successful and grow these kelp beds, what is the first sign from their point of view that something good is happening?
Pictures, videos. We shoot videos. So this is
Again, how are they going to know to their life that this is a good thing, really? That how is this going to, what is the impact they're going to know and feel? Is it all future, or is any of it right now from their point of view?
Well, this is human. Now this gets into human nature.
That's
right?
what we're talking about here.
Yep.
We're just having this human nature talk about most people don't have the passion you do of putting on, although I'd love it, but putting on the tank and going in there, explore that's on, some people are very passionate about it. It's a good thing for anybody, and everybody will love the videos of that. But what is the first thing that they're going to notice in their lives?
Well, you need to find out how to relate to them. So that's going to change depending on who your audience is. And, one of the things that we're getting better at in science, we're not great at it yet, but we're putting a lot of energy, is how do you talk to the public? And, first thing you've got to do is you got to find a common connection. So if you're talking to someone who lives on the coast, if I'm talking to just the general public.
That's what we're talking about. I'm just
going
asking for an example of one of those connections to an average person that suddenly goes, oh, I get it.
Yeah. And that's finding, how, so let's say someone who's never been to the ocean, or there's a lot of people who have never seen the ocean, but they've seen a forest. And I kind of started off there, finding a way to relate to them. Finding something that they're passionate about, that they can go, okay, I see the connection. I bring up the hiking in a forest. Does that, if you're from Colorado or Utah, one of these places, you go, do you like hiking in a forest? Is that important to you? If it's not important to them, and then I don't really care, I don't go out there and find something else that is. But if you can find a common
To
ground.
understand, but I'm saying in an average person's life, what they care about is, am I comfortable? Can I get paid? Can I do fun things that I want to do? From their point of view, they might say, oh, there's kelp out there, so that's okay. And they might say, well, I don't think this impacts me on a day-to-day basis. What do you think is the first big impact when you break through that they're going to go, I get why this is important?
I would look to them and say, okay, do you eat seafood? Okay, and then you can link it to that, because there's so much of our seafood that's harvested from coastal communities and healthy ecosystems. If they don't like seafood, I would say, okay, what about
that's a good example. I'm just looking for an example to kind of give people an understanding. And that idea for most people is, do you like seafood getting less available and more expensive at your stores? So the first thing they may do is, hey, we can actually make this seafood more available and probably less expensive. Oh, well, that would be good.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just looking for that link to the average person where
the average person, yeah. And there's a lot of links there. So, pollution. Are people interested in pollution? Plastic pollution, straws. We're now making straws out of seaweed extracts, things we harvest from seaweed. So making surfboards out of that. We're beginning to make biofuels out of seaweed extracts.
And we'll be talking about that at the Clean Tech. We'll be talking about what does the kelp have to do with clean tech, and that the biofuels is one of those links right there in the Clean Tech. That's why we're talking about it. Is there one thing you think people should know that we haven't talked about?
Well, we've covered some ground there. I think that what people don't realize is how we use kelp. The products that we use kelp. If you go to the dentist and you bite down on that squishy stuff that they make their tooth molds out of it, almost certainly that's kelp. It's an alginate impression. And so we get that out of kelp. If you like if you like ice cream, if you like silk or Twinkies or whatever foods, you go to your market and look at the ingredients, and you see alginate, algin, or you see carrageenan. These are all seaweeds. And most of these seaweeds grow within kelp forests, and they're regulated by kelp communities. We eat seaweeds every single day without even thinking about it. Things that are thicker, salad dressings, desserts, all sorts of things, your whipped creams, they all are thickened with seaweed extracts. And so, these things we don't realize that how our daily lives are impacted by it. It's not just the little seaweed snacks you buy at the store. It's in so many food products. It's becoming in so many pharmaceutical products. It's becoming in so many industrial and medical products. And it's used in biomedical research to find cures for cancers. Agarose plates that we do culturing in. Seaweed and the products we get for them are in our everyday lives, whether you know it or not. And to take them away, life's going to change. Your food, your diet, the things you could buy at the market is going to change.
And go to a Japanese market, it becomes very clear.
Go to your local supermarket and read the ingredients, and you'll see, like I said, agar, agarose, carrageenan, those are all taken from seaweeds.
So how does the average person find out more about you, San Diego State, Kelp? How do they find out more?
Well, you can Google me, Matt Edwards, San Diego State, and get to the webpage. And then from there, you can Google, kelp. California, and things you can do any search image if Google is your thing. You can do kelp restoration, and the page will come up. You'll see I'm not alone. There's a lot of us out there. There's an army of us, out there at different universities, at different private institutions, at different non-government things, at different agencies. That the Nature Conservancy is hugely invested with kelp restoration. There's a lot of us out there, and if you were to just do a search image on kelp restoration, kelp importance, you're gonna have no shortage of things to read about. and places to go and pictures to see and videos to watch and interviews like this. It's way more common and way more integrated in our daily lives than you might think.
If you'd like to see more and meet Matt Edwards, you can find out about our events. In this case, it's the Clean Tech Symposium on September 25th. You can find out how we're building that collaborative ecosystem to support and accelerate companies. You can go to aquilius.com. And I want to thank Matt Edwards, who is a biology professor and marine biology emphasis coordinator at San Diego State, and passionate tourist and harvester and scientist for kelp. Matt, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.